Tangwe Duji, Shajer Sun Zhong, Junjamada, Duja, Bonjomba, Sergilombo, Tower Jibek, Shakji Jabu, Jabdung, Janza, Dorjijan, the Lonaro Dang, Mabamala, Chijagambo, Pamotaba, Javan, the Gomba. Kajulamana, Dajon, Je, Danan, Zero, Donjo, Lamalabala, Juzozon, Losan, Janzang, Alava. Dindu Dun Chindu Begel Zor Dagel Chuzon Rover Sinja Labdozor Chualam Don Rover Sinja Labdoz Lam Chuvasi Varasinja Labdozor Chuvai Jison Javar Sinja Labdozor Kange Dinjan Javarnjong Gaba Meba Je Meba Chiba meba da meba wa meba ro meba da de do me dun je me zhe ban je je dan ba zu ba san je ma nan je dan ba de la jiang zar du zhen jie za wa la ma ji jie gu song do ji jin lang da 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 ge ju lang be de da ge den ba dan sun jie jie dong jia jian ma zhe ba xin jie la du so Nam Ka Tang Nyam Ba Sim Jin Tam Je Chu Dong De Ding De Lan Me Ba Yang Da Ba Zo Bu San Je Chu Go Ma Rong Bo Chu To Bar Cha Ti Chi De Tam Pe Chu Kan Ki Sin De Dong Nyam Sa Lam War Ji Wo Nyam Ba Sam Ba Chang Chu Ju De Sim Ji Ba Da Chu Nin Ba Kun Ju Da Kun Long Ma Nar Wu Go Ne Sim Bar Char De La Gang Sim Bar Sa Wi Chu Ne Teni Na Tam Chi Gung Ba Chik Ba Ti Tara Tsum Chuk Ba Tagum Chu Pu Tsum Tere Da Ti Nang Ke Tawu Ko La Gong Du Hu Sin Ba Re Dan De Gong Ba Hu Ba Ka Re Dan Da La Dor Ji Song Ju Ba De Ke Ka Re Song Do Se Na To Ba Gong Ba Si Ba Gong Ba Yin Song
I can cultivate motivation, bodhicitta thinking. May all sentient beings, limitless as space, attain the state of unsurpassed, perfectly complete enlightenment. So with such a motivation of bodhicitta, I think that I'm going to listen to the Holy Dhamma and then engage in practice. Again, cultivate such an unmistaken motivation for listening to the Dhamma. Dhamma we're listening to is the Gong Chik, the Buddha's single intention, consisting of those 7 sections, and we are in section number 6 on view, practice and conduct. And we have completed talking about the view. And next we come to the practice or the meditation. And that is begins in Vajra statement number 10. It says, habituating to realization is practice.
Dan Di Kap Su Da Toba Shibanda Mara Gomba Hibandala Yang Yinge Yitsola Gare Chaga Yurisina Gomba Hibanda Pen Hine Zam Dan Tingin Zi Zam Gomba Dinit Hine Da Tingin Zi Gomba Latine Dewa Sarwa Matoba Nyam Zam Jibala Dinin Gomba Sine Da Yike Yobare Sonre Da Tenda Yinkin Yu de Bare Mes Taji the Tame Yang De Konala Yin the Bungi Bayo Marwa Dan de Kaps Ying Yiba Zen du Yin Se du Chik Me Yimba Jik Tabarasan no Tongo Yo Mare Soso la Kap Kaps Teta Chowa Jing Ba Kaps O Da Te Mayin Ba Ha Kone Ona Gom Sen Da Kareri Zendu Tenin Jitin Sungo Ke Tela Gom Shiba de Topa The Gom Songandela Teni Gom Songo Yores
So then it says that others, this is said because some say that meditative practice means to generate bliss, luminosity, and non-thought in the samadhi of tranquil abiding, shamatha. And so now saying that others say that, it's not necessarily talking about other people, but it's also possible that sometimes we ourselves feel that way. And so if we feel that way, then this is not how it is, but what actually is practice. Jikten Sumgön says, habituating to realization is practice.
Tan di kapso gom sendu karel gom go yurisina toba la gom go yuri. Toba la gom siba toba de karel sina soso lama gevihini ke ngote yombe tamar ke ta di majunyung ma shiba zenari majunyung ma de soso rani la ngon chu tsawa tsamge ndike yomare ngon chu ne teni be chupa tsamke kwa la tartok mi tsang dan de ngon chupa de teni soso la dani da gung sen de yang da soso rani ke bechor chine te go yori soso bechor hibande karerisina da timba ke jun jang go yoris timba jun chas ne go yoris timba jun chas ne yondu tenin tar teni ko nelo ke ngo de la gantar ngo de gan la gompa de ngang ke chwa la ra tin tin ye gompa ngang ke chwa ta te ta ba je ma zong par de teni timba jun cha ne go yores.
So, what is it that we have to practice? What we have to habituate to is the realization. And so the realization means that, so it is the ordinary, uncontrived, innate consciousness, that awareness that the guru, the spiritual teacher, has introduced you to. So first that needs to be recognized. But then it's not enough to just recognize it. Just recognizing it will not liberate you from samsara. So having recognized it, then a continuum of this recognition must be sustained. And so in this, an effort has to be made. An effort means that one has to continuously abide within a state of awareness. And when that is sustained, then finally one recognizes the essence of the natural state of the mind. So it is that state that has to be, that awareness of that state that has to be sustained. And so until stability has been gained, one must abide within this state of mindfulness continuously.
Tenda enzan teni choban Jikten Sumgön ke te song rwa. Tusun sanje tamje ke yunglam teni ne tu jinche me be timba de yin song. E gang la hyusin bare timba ken na gom la ke song. Gom ja hu sen ne lune sang ne da da de yang de yang lopa lamji ne kap che jitang ji ri gong ke tunjin ji cha ke yore ndo so go yore de yin na yang gom shi ba de timba ma yan ba shi ban de la to do yo bare song go yore da che tang timba nyang du ngara sun Jikten power ke sam no to ni sang da wa yin na yang timba nyang yong wa yin na teni nonchor chorong ko yore wa pension tsa chik tsam shuba yana churang penan tholop tabla yigjok lin yu bakapsa ta churang ke samno de tse chik de yitse de khala de drawa de khala tse chik de mane ne de mane pa yina de kapsa churang ke samno de che hinang da jingnang da ngamra la so ba ke chersong wa yina de chu lin ya pon dab to ko marwa churang karsi lin de jang de yo ba yina yang tene chorang ke ti lobjong de jang ba kap sa yang sem che jik de te ne lobjong de jang go yor ma do chorang ke tep jik da nyu ge jik la nang lo zong ne chu chu ni hi za yin ra wa de la nang lo zong de ba ke tep ke nang dong de chorang le pa nan chen zu yong go ma ra wa chorang ke tep da nyu ge la nang lo zong de yina chorang ke sem de gan zam ba len ko ra jam nan ro song wa yina tene jang pin to ma song a pe te so ni sa no dang du teni tato chaja chimbu ngo to ba de an de re timba ke chu jin yin de ting go yor ma to ke timba ma timba yina teni gom za ya de yong ya yo ma re tenda yin za ta la ma ke to ba ga che ngo te ya ba yin yang so so ke che de che ga che ha go wa yin yang teni ju ma jang na teni gomba long to jor to ko yomaris.
So Jikten Sumgön had said that the a state of continuous mindfulness is the path of all the Buddhas of the 3 times. As you mentioned before, if you're skilled in mindfulness, you're skilled in practice, in meditation. And so when it comes to meditation, then, for example, sitting in the straight posture is a part of meditation. It is a conducive factor of meditation. It's necessary. But the actual meditation, the actual practice is to sustain an undistracted state of mindfulness. And even if we just think about it from a mundane, ordinary perspective, if we lose our mindfulness, we make many mistakes. For example, if you're in a university taking an exam, if you're not focused single-pointedly on the question at hand, you will make a mistake. You're not going to be able to give a good answer. If your mind is anxious and afraid and have all kinds of thoughts, then even if you have learned all of these things before, you will not be able to give the correct answer. And then even before, when you're learning, when you're studying, you have to focus on the subject single-pointedly. If you're holding your pen in your hand and have your book in front of you for 24 hours a day, that itself will not make the content of the subject matter enter your brain. So even if you hold your pen in your hand and you have your book in front of you all day long, if the mind wanders around the entire world, then it's of no benefit. And so it's similar with Mahamudra, realizing the nature of Mahamudra. It is necessary to sustain such a state of mindfulness at all times. And if that is not sustained, then you're not actually practicing meditation. So when the guru introduces you to that's the nature of the mind, and you have some realization of it while you are being introduced, then it's just a momentary understanding. But if you're not sustaining awareness of that, then it will not turn into practice. You're not really practicing it.
Tena yanzan da sung do the pamo trpa ke gambo bala shune ngaran su ko wala chandu junde kare ke limba ri si ya shudu dan de je trimba den cho ma jin bala tine tine chamdo go yori sung gare sung do de yanzan ngaran su kandar trinhi matin bala tine Jikten den yang tene noa dan trwa 용수 조바 팅히 안두 차 용거리 다 팅히라 히반들라 지 간더제 벤 조바제 곰고 요나 남준제 조바라고제 곰데인데 다 해당 제 용버 카토드 데 조바텔라 팅히팅야데 진로로 진인데 다 조바 현로도 데 남준제 책임바다 책주본데 다 담제 다 주도 머롱바리 데서 남양 책주보라서바 주야 미바치리 산도디 다 땡히라용 버캅서 데니 코 현로여 책임바다서 단데 땡히라부 짐생기 현로용 거만 삼이인데 희인데 용거 요 말와 다 된다 연자 곰 시반데 Jikten Sumgön ko sonne de tsek de pe le la project dan tonda chazogolo ha ko le la project dan da karchim bore che lo na wo zungwa ina choran zo gomba mayins gomba long to chba yin son ti tsek de ni long to chor sen de ta che gom de tene ko rangin da wo je tene ko rawang da wo je thotne perna jamso nane tratong nen ro endu tambo jatsu balam ramra thegro balam theyende tini trat so yela yo yong lo yo ramra mambo chi de so so ke ta tratong ni de ke zabza hyu chi go ke chagro ba Teni ta bala misa ke ma jamso gungene ko lingja de san rawo ji lebdu teni ko jotong kin de korang ran yin ko ngan rawo ji suyong go ba te to ban bezor da kale da tonang ma mo mo go basane te ta ba ji on ko komba long de ma jo par de teni jinshi ting go yore gom go yore son re.
So one time Pamutupa said to Khenpo, what is it really that makes us wander in samsara? And Khenpo said that it is because we are not mindful that we wander, that we grasp and wander in samsara. So if we do not practice mindfulness, then even in the worldly sense, we make mistakes and we become confused. All mistakes and confusion comes from a lack of mindfulness. It's because we have lost mindfulness. For example, if you're normally mindful of practicing patience, but then when you get really angry, you lose your mindfulness. So you forget about the practice of patience. So then you lose your patience. So normally you know that you shouldn't say harsh, unkind words to someone, that you should practice patience. But then at the moment where you have lost your mindfulness, harsh words slip out of you naturally. It's because you are not mindful. You're not saying that intentionally because you want to say it, but it's because you're not mindful. And so then there's a quote by Jikten Sumgön that is very important. The words are very simple, easy to understand, but very, very important. So I encourage you to memorize these words. And so he said that it is not practice, it is habituation. It is bringing habituation to full maturity. So as you keep habituating, eventually you will gain autonomy, control, and then it becomes natural. So for example, if you're going out into the ocean on a ship, on a boat, so first there are a lot of waves, and the boat is kind of moves left and right, and is tossed around in the ocean. So when that is the case, then you as the captain have to be very careful. But then as you go out into the open ocean, the waves disappear and it's more gentle. And so at that time, you have gained some maturity of awareness. And then because things become more natural, it doesn't require so much effort and attention and hardship anymore. But until you come to this state, it is necessary to sustain mindfulness. So we need to habituate to mindfulness.
다 다히 곰바 마이 곰바 롱도 줄바인 히바 되게 책디 내라 가려 요르스나 곰데 달라 루베 준체 미바 냠바 야소 다 라마 게히니제게 주랑 곰 야고 곰고 요르다즈데 라소 세테세 라소 세테 라소 지니 테니 계자된 참 야바단 파지 송아이나 테니 대장가 핀토 토고 요마르와 대인자 다 소소랑 라래 송아 소소랑 라래 잔 진히디 추진인데 띠네 로나 도나 냐르나 데니 진히디 저데 가르침보 차도 요르 다 다랑 가랑 촌로베제 이나 남진 참잔 혀거요 다 소소라 냠린 데 미잔치 멀 혀데나 로징닝 뭐 차본다오제 요레 데 이나야 꿀홍다오 데라치 rāngla mīna yīngla pīng tōnān rō samne tsōwān rō samsa jīne xūbāyīn tēyāndu dēngxī tīngsā tē tarā ngā rāng sō jāngchō kū sēng rāng tōla dēngxī tīng jīna ngūne chāne rāng jī bā yīngla pīng bā tēndā chādu yō rē sōsō rāñī jī lāma trūpa kō tāwa jī ka mēng yō na rē mēng na rē jī kīmbō lā sō bā ka mēng zīne yō na rē mēng na rē kāntar jāngchō kū sēng tōla 진시 띵대와는 응은 산제 그 주부 그 무슨 차대 요래 대인도 다시 장초 그 셈랑 돌았다 진시 띵에서 따지되 같이 모르스.
So it is not practice, it is habituation. It is bringing habituation to full maturity. And so then it says, since that habituation depends on oneself, you should continuously set your mind in equipoise. So your guru tells you you should meditate, you should practice. So when he says that, you say, yes, I will do that. So that is for the time being. You feel that way, but after the conversation is over and you forget about it again, then it is of no benefit. So that is why it says here, habituation depends on yourself. Habituation that is sustained like a flowing river at all times, whether you are walking or sitting or lying down, it is important to sustain mindfulness. And so now, even though I'm not someone with great practice, I'm still sharing that with you. So on the one hand, that might be a little embarrassing. On the other hand, I feel that even though if I myself don't have the practice, if I say that to others, it will benefit them. So basically, what needs to be sustained with mindfulness is actually just bodhicitta. It is your own happiness and the benefit of others. So it doesn't matter whether you have the name of a lama or a dugu or of a Khenpo and so on. If you just sustain mindfulness of bodhicitta, that is the actual dugu or nirmana kaya. So it is important, therefore, to sustain mindfulness of just bodhicitta.
장초 선을 딩히 띵단데 당 나랑 샘들라스 장초 샘제 요나 타나 소소라니 롱바 동바 롱동징네 롱바 동바지는 소소직보 론도 그 요나야 당가 줄라 제 샘낭들라 장초 샘제 요난달라 심지 나랑 그 통화다 문통과 심지 만보지 유주리 도소 순통송아나 되는 소소라니 제 도소 그 제조 그 릭더당 통더도 차로 요르와 다 드나로 제 썸나 당네 제 소소 직본 로봇 값이야. 근데 소소 직보 그제 많이 로봇 값이야. 다 소소 니사는 많이 로봇 값이 이나야. 다 소소 그제 줄라 장촉 섬제야. tinhi jikten 많이 되바이나 다 소소 그 주부 나로요 베심부 자차 동차 요르 쯔쯔 장미 요르 단더소 탐제라양 제 저저걸로 코란즈 나랑즈 주보다 코란즈 그 코용도 지 차데디 되니 코란즈 대와단 지바 차노그리 산네 되니 장조 섬진히 된야라고 당 대하는 인게 제다 나랑즈 제 머핀스와 까물 히바이나 제 예산라고 당 지머지 그 메인제나 메인 야간라고 제야 랍데바이나 되니 파르브 머데 머치땅와지 이나네 심바간로르 심바가나 게와로와 대 장조 성근양리리 파르브 머데 제다 장조 선발라서 베제와지 이나네 코 메인 야가 주반친 린제 주바자나 핑우 간다 송도 등아 저 동샤도 소고는데 해 잡으바 다 드라 섬노 땅니고 장족 샘라
가래 덤 비스코 미티 장조선 베게와 유나데니 미 야갈라나 가래
멋지 장초선 그 제와인 telang아랑 저거 코그 메인 야가로 때 라바이나 드니 나랑 저게 장초선 벤친 린지 주베 까바 만볼라 데바 단로야다 수남 진본주야 송코요로 어때다베 용코요레스
So if you sustain mindfulness of bodhicitta, for example, so if you have bodhicitta in your mind, and even if you're all by yourself in some kind of empty place where you're alone, but if you have bodhicitta, there are many sentient beings in that space still, in that place that you can see or you cannot see. But whoever sees you, you naturally become a liberation upon seeing or liberation upon touching and so on, because in your mind there is bodhicitta. So even if you're going alone somewhere, that's why you sustain bodhicitta. Or if you're going to sleep at night, you're lying in your bed and you're going to sleep, if you fall asleep with bodhicitta and the mindfulness of bodhicitta, then even in that state, all the hundreds and thousands of countless microorganisms that are within your body, it creates their happiness, because your body is where they live, is their environment. So if you have bodhicitta, it will also bring happiness and well-being to them. Or if you are like talking to a person in a polite way, and you say, you call them like you kind of address them in a good way, then it will make them feel happy. And if it makes them feel happy, it's virtuous. So this is how you practice bodhicitta. Or if that person that you're addressing is an actual bodhisattva, then, as it is said in the Confession Sutra, it says that if one says the name of a bodhisattva just one time, one's negativities will become purified and accumulate great merit.
Ta ten soso ke tinshi tinkan do dam do soso sang dang go yora che ma che la hisa we ke ja hien du tinshi rang yin ke ting go do te ha te za ma gom de tin tinshi tin tin hisa de ja tan ra wen la me yong go yore tin tinshi ma tin ba yin na tin ko ke ja tam jin na na yang tin ma sem la phon ro yang da wo ta tin hisa me ba la so ba tan ra ke 좀 참아 진심 맞긴 되는 용거요래 다 된다 연장 다라 나랑 속에 진시 띵데 버게 진시 세와진도 데페 같이 모래 데야 남파른데 타 산제 그냥 야이시라야 되는 용거요래스 난데 용화데 좀생 강에서는 베나 장첩 저그 취 숨져 잡든세 요래와 장초 저거 추순제 잡된 데난게 대 산제 그 용딩리 장초 저거 추선도 제단 직딩 커버치 당 되니 다 장초 저거 다 산제 그 희완양엘인데 비추선 이완이 시와이나 장초 저거 추순제 잡된데 희완양엘인데 비추 공수도로 요래 대또 온데 대나나 당보데 가래 요리스나 진바니 버 여버 이제 요래 다 진바니 버 여버 이인데 초랑 그 값은 냠슬린자리 혁자도 바그 초랑 값은 냠슬랑 와리 냠슬랑 나와리 초랑 값은 진바니 버 여버 이 띵발라 띵네 진바니 버 여버 이데 냠슬린데 텔 띵네 지금 다 먼저서 담제 빵네 데 제다와 이다 빵데 양다 봉와 예 송거도 다 된다 웬드네 데네 디 팀바니 버 여바 예데 강터 촐람니 졸람라야 남퍼 졸람니 톨람라 남퍼 데니 남퍼린 인다 가레스 팀바 데라 따라데 데니 왕봉아시 다 왕보다 왕랑 좀 메고 왕보스네 베 가르친 버린도 따지 동시 암초에나 나 왕보스 투지 나의 왕보스 저처지 코 쪼로 인데 코야 쪼체르로 데니 똥아시 다코 똥라고 지는 저는 데니 코 내가 흉침벌레 터야 차인데 다 든라위네 간tar 산지의 사 냠자의 힘 맡아봐도 용거요래 대연자 산지의 초람니 템바니 니야 이게라 곰네 맹다 만다와타로 그리마도 템바니 이게 곰드 데니 다 만두 버접지 센도 산지의 용띠나 만디 버접지는 timpa nyambar maya pa munga waso ta do nyambar yadar sanje tan de kan tar yang cholam ni timpa ni ya ye ke ti timpa ni ya to so ya nam par ne ya chalong jong ne ta jong wa ba
And so whether or not you're sustaining mindfulness at all times, you have to see yourself. So when you're talking politely to someone, then you're just naturally mindful because you're mindful of what you're saying. Whether or not you have habituated to that before. But if you're not mindful, you're talking to someone, then you might say something unpolite, something offensive to the person, offends them. So actually all faults come from that, come from a lack of mindfulness. So Therefore, sustaining mindfulness is very important, and it is sustained until it reaches complete maturity, until one reaches the state of the omniscient mind of the Buddha. And so we speak about those 37 factors conducive to enlightenment, and these 37 factors are all qualities of a Buddha. And so there are two kinds of like dharmas, and there is the worldly like the worldly affairs of the worldly ways of humans, and then there is the ways of the Buddhas of peaceful nirvana. And so the 37 factors conducive to enlightenment belong to the latter. And one begins with the 4 applications of mindfulness in the context of the path of accumulation. This is also how the Buddha Shakyamuni had practiced. He practiced the 4 applications of mindfulness, and then habituating to them, continuously sustaining them, then that naturally led to the next factors conducive to enlightenment, which are the 4 authentic abandonments. So then sustaining these 4 applications of mindfulness at all times then leads to the abandonment of all unfavorable circumstances, unconducive circumstances, which then are the 4 authentic abandonments. And so then they continue to increase as one proceeds from the path of accumulation to the path of application to the path of seeing and so on. So these qualities increase, and then one develops the 5 faculties, the powers of the 5 faculties. For example, the eye faculty, which is very important to us. We see things or we hear things and so on. And so then when the senses, when one sustains continuous mindfulness, the senses attain power. So then these are called the 5 powers of the power of the sense faculties. And so then one can perform great great qualities then come from the 5 faculties, the sense faculties. And so in this way, it might be given different names, but we might call it the 4 applications of mindfulness and so on. But basically, it is the sustaining of mindfulness, starting from the path of accumulation up until the path of Buddhahood. And so if one habituates to those 4 applications of mindfulness, one develops qualities. It is said that the Buddha also possesses 18 unique qualities, one of which is that so through the meditative equipoise of mindfulness, the Buddha has an unfailing mind of mental presence of mindfulness. He's never not mindful. He's always mindful. So, and this is how basically mindfulness increases along the different stages of the path.
Ta ndra tin si bare ngaranga tin yo kare tingres na o chamre chuk tamar ke hiba machu bangang la timba chang gore la dos te chamre changchok sem la timba chang ze kare la ko re te ji dang ro ha ko sama ro chi tin si bar wa karsi tin ke yo ba yin na sanje la yang nyam ya da ji thop si ni yo re nyam par yaw bu kap dang te ni ji thop la yar dang yo ma chi te yu na ngarang cho la yang lo de nam ju ngarang so che so so ke ta tamar ke hiba de kan la tin hi ma nya ma to ne ta ma chu lak par ya lu por yo ya ndera wa ta kha sirte ke hiba de slo lo pan tro yong ba kap so slo lo tro yong ba kap so ta chak pa dang wa la so ba ke che de ni mi pa la yu par dro ta ba da yu pa la mi par ko an de ba te ta che ma de pa Teni chanchok sem tol tin hitin yabayna teni pe samnon de kasela korna yang teni tin hik sin de batang teni samnon nang la char khor de bain korde yang tin hik sin de ba chang kdo tan de karchen boyen ba ngarang chola karche meche ke namba hi magu ba cha de yore pe na sanje hyakja de ba ta ji yin yang ngombar zoba sang je sin chujin kholo dambo la so ba kor char du yang perna chagu bombara la so ba tang jarpu khab la so ba la yong do ba kap so teni khor ni tu tamje ka trawa tu khong teng en zela nyam par yad do tambo teni teng en zela dang de sen ko do te kar re sang je cha du ta yang jar chi ti gom jan go ya te tarong che tror ma tham ne gom ja ka yor we sina mare si nan de kandar che gom sung ta ra ta ngarang so phak ke ndo hiwa na pho gom sung ta teni da te ta we chi indu teni ngarang so ka te ta we che je ba ina yung ju yo ba sanje hyakja de ba hiwa de che zum thon do jan jang tin ro no ke ta mari da 산제 샤자 더바시바데 뭐 파와 직제네 제 자갈 라이 톰보 망보 요바난게 제 레인 톰보 휴드나 게 마제네 다 자포 잠짱 세라 세스 제와 이네 드니 나랑서 파바나 이외네 드니 까와제 동아 망보 냠스 뇽와 드라라서바네 드니 고 드라베네 드니 달 뭐버저 상제 바지 인데 tene ngaran chola yang dara damjor chup je chama mlur bo ji yong chu ba chang de sanje sangje ba yin de ngaran choke zung ju ge jok ba yin na den tun jin yo de ba da cha de yo ba.
So it's also possible that you might think the following. Also, I thought that way before. So I might think that if we just have to sustain the ordinary innate consciousness on the one hand, but then also you say that you have to sustain mindfulness of bodhicitta on the other hand. So how does this come? How is this really practiced? So if you think in this way, think of the Buddha. So the Buddha also actually had states where he was in meditation and then post-meditative states. So he was like an ordinary person like ourselves. So when we meditate and rest in meditation, we sustain a state of mindfulness of the uncontrived, unaltered, natural state. And then again, after that, we come to the post-meditative state where the mind is projected outward and we develop thoughts of attachment and aversion and so on. And so then we superimpose an existence upon things that do not exist, or we deny the existence of things that do actually exist and so on. But now if you sustain mindfulness of bodhicitta, then even when the mind is projected outward, there still is mindfulness of bodhicitta. And then when it is projected inward, then there still is this mindfulness. And so not even talking about ourselves, even the Buddha practiced in this way. The Buddha Shakyamuni, even after he had attained complete enlightenment and after he had already turned the first wheel of Dharma and so on, for example, in places like Vulture Peak or Rajgriha and so on, for example, there were occasions where his assembly of hearers, of the Shravakas, would ask him questions, and before he would respond, he would place his mind into a state of samadhi, and then he would arise from the samadhi. So one might think that, does it mean that he still has to meditate and practice? Does it mean that he still isn't liberated? Actually, quite to the contrary. It's actually a sign of having brought meditation practice to maturity. So, for example, when we think of the Buddha Shakyamuni, he's not just someone who walked around performing miracles, but he was an ordinary person, just like we are now, to begin with. In India, there are many different castes, higher and lower, and he was not actually of the highest caste. He was the son of a king, an ordinary person who endured a lot of hardship and a lot of suffering, and he he, through his effort, attained enlightenment in the end. And so now we possess a precious human body with all the 18 freedoms and advantages. So if we practice with diligence, we do actually have the conducive factors to attain what the Buddha attained.
다 대인장 다라데 딤초 자주래 이네 낭도 추저베 간두 바에 무릎 덥서.
And so it says in the Vajra basic tantra, by turning the mind inward, you attain any siddhi you desire.
대가는 인게 제파모트바 가르송르시나 ngui zumtra la so pas rendu pong la semla tu semla ta ta madarna top jum mandi chobje ta minjik yala so ba ye sanje yonti malupa pardo tampo war ngi so.
Then Lord Pamodrupa had said, abandon all hopes and wishes, such as for supernormal perception and supernatural powers, and look at your own mind. If you do not separate from looking at the mind, it is certain that all the Buddha qualities, such as the 10 powers, the 18 unique qualities, and the 4 kinds of fearlessness, will come to you in the first intermediate state.
다티오 도르지송 쭉직 바테게 쭈바데 띵거 다 따와 곰바니 휴심바르와 간라다 쭈바데 쭈바데라 쭈바 랑더 트라와 추점 인소 단데 값이 양 인기 이바데 휴바인나 담보 따따와 세지도 주니 동바니 차자 정보리스 드네 이나 야 쭈바는 다 gede galandor the tower and do muje so tenen Jikten Sumgön ke yibala juba sebade lando the tower chutron rumboche deri so.
So that completes the view and the practice. And then next becomes the conduct, which is on the Vajra statement 11. The conduct that is without accepting and abandoning is the precious, disciplined conduct. And so that is what Jikten Sumgön says, and other people might claim that the view is dharmata, emptiness, and mahamudra, and that the conduct is freedom from accepting virtue and rejecting evil. And so Jikten Sumgön says that the conduct that is without any accepting or abandoning is the precious, disciplined conduct.
Tanda chirtan da jawaka ju bandi lola chirtan ke tawa killing tawas mulare ba ko la tawa mixa tawa sin denda sin yomari song song gang la shu sin ba imba ta de de dumthe yaw ba tawa de la dumthe ke yaw dumtha ke yaw ba tawa denda chi yomari tawa killing tawas teni gomba yiji tawa si te yile se de ba ina teni yangla tel himba yangla tel zimba la so ba yu zan teni gomba la ya te yiji ta tawa cha gori song song himba den zimba me ba ben nawe me chen himbe chen himba chu je naro ba song ne telo ba ke naro ba la te ta ji song ro ba ta de ta ju ba se wa de ona kanare se ne ju ba lando de tawas ju ba lando tawande 다 추천 르보치 데리 소리 다 란더 타와 히반데 게와라 차바당 메게와라 당와미 바스 다 란더 타와 시베 돈 데르노.
So in the Kagyu tradition, it is said that the view is without having a view. As you mentioned before, Milarepa said, I have no view. So the view, the accepted view is to be without a view. And then the meditation, as you mentioned, is to not engage in conceptualization with the mind. So once there is clinging and grasping, one doesn't actually have meditation or practice. So the practice must be without clinging and grasping. Tilopa also said to Naropa, son, it is not the appearances that keep you in bondage, but it is your clinging, it is your attachment to the appearances that bind you to keep you in bondage. So therefore cuts through the clinging attachment to appearances. So then what is the conduct? The conduct is without accepting or abandoning. And that is the actual disciplined conduct. So the disciplined conduct of discipline. So to be without accepting or abandoning means to be without attachment to virtue and without aversion to non-virtue. So that is to be without accepting and abandoning.
Kyobpa lando the travel in the Hamaobayina. Teni Nanda Mambo Yunga Yuri, Tsutram Susu the Tsutram the Lomsam Jing Tsutram and Journey. Lomsam Jing Tsutram and Journey, not Tsutram Japara the Sin to Goyomarwa. Tsutram Japara the Sim Atana. Teni Tarate Zuba Para the Sim Kalakapo Chagayores, called Lam Koram want to say Bayana. Kalakapo Zoli. Tendai da in the Da Lomsam Jing Tsutram Tamjike. Da Tsutram Jin in a Lomsam the Dimba Tamjike, Tsutram la Lomsam Jin, oh, Nan Tsutram Choko, Nan Tsutram the Yaboin, San, Teni Tsutram the Medimba Tamjela, Teni, Tonchong Jibata, Mehie Jibata, not the Rayong Yorba. That Tsutram Din is do Kandar Tawa can inga the to Gomba can Yamyong the Yabos you and do. Tasuso get Getig Landol Manarpa. The Kantayang, Digba la Dawa Mijang, Digba Ngo de Duzamayan Ba Hakone, Teni Legend Tracking, Trawatam Jelan Zem. Gewa Shibatela, Cha Maromba, Hako Tony, Ditun to Tony, Teni Gewa Traki Trawa in a young, Teni Yin Simjing Tamjig Dondo, Tasunam Kim Meta Chung in a young, Teni take. Samje machapa ke teni pimba da dewa drop to yu zang teni gewa de chur limba o tela sobo ge toni gedek de landor la teni momungba te ta becha ke yo baris.
So if one doesn't understand the essential point of the conduct that is without accepting and abandoning, then one's disciplined conduct might become again an arrogant disciplined conduct. And if one becomes filled with arrogance about one's conduct, then one cannot actually reach perfection, attain the parameter of disciplined conduct. And so since the parameters build on each other, if one cannot attain the parameter of disciplined conduct, it will also be difficult to attain the parameter of patience, the next one. So this disciplined conduct based on arrogance is when you think that, for example, I'm very disciplined. My discipline is supreme. My discipline is excellent. And then when you see someone who is not as disciplined as you are, then you might belittle them and scorn or scold them for not having enough discipline and so on. So to have this precious disciplined conduct that is without accepting and abandoning, first is preceded by a realization of the view and an experience in practice and meditation. And if you have that, then you are unmistaken as to what should be done and what should be given up. So having no aversion or not rejecting non-virtue is that although you have no aversion against non-virtue, you know that non-virtue is not something to be practiced, to be accepted. So knowing that, you will refrain from even the slightest negative action. And when you realize that virtue, now, even though you know that you shouldn't be attached to virtue, once you have realized the view before, then you will know that this is something naturally to be practiced. So you will practice even the slightest virtue, even the slightest thing that brings benefit to other sentient beings. And you will even practice this smallest spark of virtue, and knowing that it will be of inconceivable benefit. So in this way, you practice what needs to be practiced and abandon what needs to be abandoned in an unmistaken way. So you're not blinded as to what should be done, what should be given up.
Landur mi pichupa te chadang mi be lunga yins. Guan zorn korn chamso.
Jikten Sumgön said, the conduct that is without accepting and abandoning is a body and speech that is free from attachment and aversion. If one has a mistaken understanding of that, one roams in samsara.
Tani da de tingin zi jarbole kare song yirisinan do tingzin jarbole. Kan yik chun de tun ne cha si jing, chuma yin ban tong na kong cho jie, nga jar tikpa chom na likpa te, nga jar wang dunghar jisun so.
And it says in the Samadhi Raja Sutra, if someone having heard the Dharma develops attachment, and upon seeing something that is not Dharma gives rise to anger, if he overcomes such arrogant pride, that will be good. Otherwise, by the power of pride, he will experience suffering.
Oh, that tana yagamani tani yang tana yagra.
Oh, yeah. Stop there.
Sunam de tamje zebanye tovanye be danan bazun de jegan anje balon roba sibun zolen rowa rowa yo jambar ba jedan jimba dang kunzo zomba dean dejin teda gunje jiza dalo jegewan de da danje rado o chancho simjo rambo je maje banam jije Jiba nyamba miba yang gonu gongdo bewa yo simje neba chinye ba nyurde nele darjur jen rowe nena malu dadun jongwa meba yo pama simje damje dedan denjur jen inro damje dadu dongwar yo janchu samba kanda saryo teda gunje mola nyurndrub yo May every being ailing with the disease be freed at once from every malady. May all the sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Belly.
Thank you.
Tuji Jaina.
Tuji.